Hello and a very warm welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Sanam Shanti. Joining me today is Majid Takht-Ravanchi, the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations. He joins us from New York. Thank you so much for speaking to us, sir.
Good to be with you.
Now, this interview comes at a very important time ahead of this fast approaching deadline set by Tehran. Mr. Ambassador, will Iran deny access to the IAEA nuclear inspectors if there's no sanctions relief by February 21st? That's less than 2 weeks away.
First of all, I should say that it was not Iran that left the negotiating table. It was not Iran that left the nuclear deal. It was not Iran that violated Resolution 2231. It was the United States that violated Resolution 2231. It was the US that violated JCPOA. And we waited for a year after the illegal withdrawal of the United States from the nuclear deal. And it was suggested to us by the remaining participants of the JCPOA not to leave JCPOA as the United States did back in 2018. So we waited for a year. When we felt that nothing tangible was happening and the promises given to us were not honored, we left with no other options than to reduce our commitments in accordance with Article 36 of the JCPOA. And then after a while, our parliament was engaged in this and adopted a legislation. And based on the legislation, there are certain requirements that have to be met. And the government of Iran is obliged to honor the commitments made by the parliament, and we have to obey the law. And the law stipulates clearly what needs to be done. So what we have to do is to honor what we need to do, and we will do it in accordance with the law.
So for now, it seems that both sides, based on what you're saying, are very much standing firm. If I may, I might want to compare this to the Persian Taruf, inviting the other party to take the first step. What about, Mr. Ambassador, a synchronized re-entry? Iran and the US slowly returning to their JCPOA commitments at the same time?
When the US withdrew from the JCPOA, that was a big blow to the reputation of the United States. That was a big blow to the international law. And that was also a big blow to the US trust all over the world, including in Iran. So our people do not have any trust in the words of the United States. So it is the United States that needs to start implementing its obligations in order to gain the trust of the Iranian people. So when we are talking about return to the nuclear deal, we have to bear in mind the fact that the United States is obligated to honor its commitments. Still, today, the US is in violation of Resolution 2231 and the JCPOA. So it is quite clear who should take the first step.
So it very much seems like we have a battle of wills here, with this clock ticking down to that final whistle. I mentioned one deadline earlier. There's also Iran's June presidential vote. What about this American argument that it was the previous administration that violated the JCPOA? And Joe Biden has been and continues to be an advocate of diplomacy with Iran.
As I said earlier, the US today, the Biden administration today is in violation of Resolution 2231. The Biden administration is in violation of the nuclear deal. So it doesn't matter who is in charge, who is in charge in Washington. What matters is the obligations of the United States. When we agreed with the United States during Obama administration, it is as in other agreements, other international agreements. You are dealing with states. You are not dealing with a specific government. So when Obama administration agreed to a nuclear deal, when Obama administration agreed and sponsored Resolution 2231, it was an obligation, an international obligation of the United States. it doesn't matter who is in the White House, either a Republican candidate or a Democratic candidate. What matters is the obligation of the United States, which need to be honored.
We are where we are today. What about gestures of goodwill? What about this? Iran's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, had said that a positive step towards diplomacy would be for Washington to cease its support for Saudi Arabia. And Joe Biden is seemingly doing exactly that in Yemen, albeit in rather baby steps. That's a concession, is it not?
No, if you're talking about the situation in Yemen, it is a very unfortunate, senseless war initiated by Saudi Arabia, which should have been ended many years ago. It started almost 6 years ago, and during the last 6 years, many innocent lives have been perished, and destruction of the country is very much to the sorrow of every individual in the world. So it is the Saudi Arabian government who is responsible for what's happening. And unfortunately, the United States and certain European countries have sent deadly armaments to Saudi Arabia, killing innocent people in Yemen. So if the United States decides to stop sending arms to Saudi Arabia, it's a good sign, but that needs to be verified. In fact, the U.S. words need to be supplemented.
So Mr. Ambassador, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You don't see cancelling the terrorist designation against Houthi rebels or terminating U.S. intelligence support for the Saudi-led coalition as a real palpable step, as tough love, as Minister Zarif put it?
You know, what is important, it's to stop the war in Yemen. As I said, if the words are going to be supported by action, that's a very good sign. But for the time being, we need to see action. We need to see an end in the war, in the senseless war in Yemen.
Absolutely. It is the world's worst humanitarian crisis. You alluded to that earlier. So what is Iran planning to do vis-a-vis this war in Yemen now? We know that talks are currently underway with the UN envoy, but Ambassador Takht-Ravanchi, is Iran eventually willing to cease its support for the Houthis?
We have always supported the UN initiative in Yemen. Mr. Griffiths was in Tehran the other day, and he had good meetings in Tehran. We have always said that we support the United Nations activities in Yemen. In fact, back in 2015, at the beginning of the war in Yemen, we presented a 4-point plan to the United Nations and to the whole international community. Unfortunately, at that time, our initiative was rejected by the United States and by Saudi Arabia. And after 6 years, still our initiative, our plan is on the table, and we do everything possible in order to see an end to this war.
Is that anything possible equivalent to seizing support for the Houthi rebels?
No, we are in contact with all segments of Yemen society, including Houthis. So they are talking to us. We are talking to other individuals in Yemen. We are talking to other factions, other parties in Yemen. And what we can do is to encourage all sides to agree to a genuine ceasefire, to agree to a genuine end to the unfortunate blockade in Yemen, and for the provision of humanitarian assistance to this war-torn country.
Now, speaking of these concessions, what if the U.S. uses, or it decides to even to give the green light to Iran's request for a $5 billion IMF loan? Is that going to bring about any hope that Tehran will then in return reciprocate by, let's say, freeing the jailed U.S. citizens? I'm, of course, speaking about Siamak and Bagher Namazi, among others.
First of all, on the IMF loan, it is very unfortunate that the United States, since early last year, has prevented the provision of this loan to Iran, as it is done with other countries. So it is very unfortunate to see that. It is the right of individual countries to receive loans from IMF, particularly at the height of the pandemic. It is It is against international law. It is against international humanitarian law to prevent countries from receiving loans. As with regard to the detainees, we have proposed to the United States to exchange all detainees on both sides. Unfortunately, up to now, the United States has not accepted our offer to exchange a comprehensive exchange of all detainees in both countries.
So very briefly, you're saying that talks are underway. Iran is offering to do a prisoner swap.
That has been our position since many months. And that offer has not been accepted up to now.
Ambassador Takht-Ravanchi, I want to speak to you about the diplomatic process itself. It doesn't come as much of a surprise that the French have been especially vocal on this topic, with Emmanuel Macron going as far as saying that external players like Saudi Arabia should be involved in new negotiations. Is the French president mistaken in thinking that realistically there can be more than two decision makers here, the Americans and the Iranians?
First of all, there is no ground for reopening the nuclear file. JCPOA was concluded back in 2015, and it is not going to be reopened for negotiation. So there is no negotiation for JCPOA. And the participants of JCPOA are named in Resolution 2231. So we cannot add anyone to it. We cannot cross out any names in the JCPOA. So the participants are clear, and everybody knows who those participants are.
Ambassador Takht-Ravanchi, on that note, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us here on France 24.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the interview.
Your needs are changing, and so is France24.com. With articles, reports, the latest international news, all our programmes available on replay, together with live broadcasting 24/7. Intuitive, fast, and available in 4 languages. France24.com. Liberté, égalité, actualité.